Now let's dive into how to run combat in the One Ring Roleplaying Game. Combat. So we definitely want to know about combat. There was a ring and a clatter as the company drew their swords. So, once a combat encounter is initiated, the following steps must be applied in order to keep the action flowing. Okay, opening volleys. If the player heroes and their opponents are separated by a distance at the start of a fight, all combatants are allowed to make ranged attacks before combat at close quarters is initiated. The lore master must determine how many volleys to allow based on the distance between separated fighters. Under most circumstances, all combatants are entitled to at least one volley using a bow or thrown weapon. If the distance is greater, then the lore master might allow combatants to let loose 2 volleys or even more. All volley attacks are resolved as normal range attacks. See the next page, okay? Normally, the volley exchange is resolved with the player heroes launching their volleys first, unless the lore master considers circumstances to favor the opposition. When the opening volleys are completed, the combatants cover the distance that separates them and then begin fighting at close quarters. Close quarters rounds. Once fighting at close quarters is initiated, the gameplay is broken down into a cycle of rounds, played one after the other until the end of the battle. Each round follows the sequence set out below. 1. Stance. The player heroes choose their stances. 2. Engagement. All combatants in close combat are paired with one or more opponents. 3. Attack rolls resolution. The actions of all combatants are resolved, with those fighting in close combat going first. So, stance cards. This starter box includes a set of stance cards. These are meant to be used with the One Ring core rulebook. The full rules for fighting and traveling allow the players to choose a more specific stance during battles and to assign the role to each player hero in the journey. Players wishing to use the stance cards can do so knowing that forward, open, and defensive are all close combat stances, and that rearward is the ranged combat stance. Hold on, let's check that out. Here, I've got cards, a lot of different item cards, just what I remember. Nope, those are all items. Well, what are these? Could it be these? Let's find out. So, on this side, we've got Guide, Hunter, Lookout, Scout. But on the other side, we've got Open, Close Combat, Rearward, Ranged Combat, Defensive, and Forward. Okay, so I guess since you've got to make these choices, and I guess in this starter set we're just doing Close Combat or Ranged, but maybe you put it, or actually you might set it so that the action you're taking is closest to you so that you can read it. I wonder if that's what that's for. And I wonder if these others are like what you're doing while traveling. That would be pretty cool. So I bet the cards it's talking about are these. And it does give you close combat, ranged combat, close combat as the simpler version for this starter set. So that's cool. So, 1. Stance. All players select whether they will fight the round in close combat or ranged combat. Player heroes can choose to fight freely in close combat at the start of each round, while they are allowed to fight in ranged combat only if there's at least 2 other adventurers fighting in close combat. So if there's not, you can't get away, I suppose. Fighters in close combat exchange blows in the thick of the fight using swords, axes, and other close combat weapons, while those engaged in ranged combat stay back using ranged weapons like bows and spears, and can be targeted only by attackers using similar weapons. So I suppose this is not assuming that you are pushing around miniatures on the table. This sounds like a way to kind of do just the narrative-based combat, using a rule like that says if there aren't at least 2 people who can be in close combat, that third person can't step out and do ranged. Engagement. At the start of each round, player heroes fighting in close combat must choose 1 or more opponents to engage. If all opponents are already engaged, player heroes without an adversary must join another player hero fighting an enemy. Player heroes fighting in ranged combat cannot be engaged in close combat and may only be attacked by enemies using ranged weapons. More enemies than heroes. If there are more enemies than heroes, it is possible there will be enemies left when everyone is fighting in close combat has engaged an adversary. If this happens, the lore master chooses whether the spare enemies engage a player hero who is already fighting in close combat stance, or stand back to attack with ranged weapons. Enemies who stand back to use ranged weapons may attack any player hero involved in the fight. So I guess we're not doing, shooting into melee combat. You're just open. Attack rolls resolution. Unless differently specified, the attacks of all combatants are resolved with the player hero going first. When all player heroes have resolved their attacks, the lore master will resolve all of those of the adversaries. So we're not doing any kind of complicated initiative thing here. We're also just giving the lead to the players. Close combat with attack rolls are resolved first, then all ranged attacks follow. An attack is a die roll made using the combat proficiency corresponding to the weapon used. So in this case, if Balin here is swinging his axe, looks like he would get 3 plus a feat die. The difficulty of all attacks by the player heroes is based on their strength TN, modified by the parry rating of the targeted enemy. The difficulty of all attack rolls made by adversaries against a player heroes are equal to the targeted hero's parry score instead. So a little bit different way to resolve players versus the NPC adversaries. So we do have to figure out how to modify the player's attack roll based on strength with the enemy's parry. But also that does mean that if the lore master is fighting against the players, they're not able to just immediately determine what that roll is. They need to have the parry scores of all the different players easily accessible in order to roll against them, I would think. As it turns out, how to do that was never made explicit in the starter rule set, and so I never got back to it as I was originally shooting this video. So I had to look it up here, and this is what I found out. Consulting the bestiary in the core rulebook, I see that what it means by modifying the strength TN by the parry of the foe is in fact pretty straightforward. Monster parry scores are different than hero parry scores. Each monster, like this orc chieftain here, has a parry score of +3, which increases the character's strength TN for the attack, making it harder to hit the chieftain. Other orcs and goblins and other beasts have different parry modifiers. This is different from the parry scores of the player heroes, which was the source of my initial confusion. The player's parry scores are just much higher numbers, but this is because this is the TN that the bad guys use to strike them, and there, apparently, is no standard modification to that TN like there is when the heroes attack. So the hero and non-hero parry scores work a bit differently, but it seems the math works out about right in the end. A successful attack roll inflicts damage in the form of endurance loss based on the weapon used and may inflict additional special damage types based on the degree of success of the roll. Finally, attacks may cause more long-lasting injuries if a piercing blow is scored. Endurance loss. When a melee or ranged attack roll succeeds, the target suffers an immediate loss of endurance equal to the damage rating of the weapon used. Oh, so Balin's axe here just has a damage rating of 6. It doesn't call for a roll, it's just immediately removing 6. The player heroes who see their endurance decrease to match or go below their total load score become weary. If the endurance is reduced to 0, they drop unconscious instead. Adversaries do not normally become weary due to the endurance loss, but are normally eliminated upon reaching 0 endurance. Okay. Special damage. If a successful attack roll produces 1 or more success icons, we remember those, they can be used to trigger 1 or more special results. Each heading below indicates how many success icons are required to trigger the corresponding effect. Multiple success icons can be used to trigger different results or the same one multiple times. Okay. Heavy blow. Any weapon, 1 success. You have hit your opponent with great force and precision. Spend 1 success icon to inflict on your adversary an additional loss of endurance equal to your strength rating. So again, I suppose that's my strength rating up there. Fend off. Any close quarters combat weapon, 1 success. You exploit your successful attack to place yourself in an advantageous position. Spend 1 success icon to gain a parry modifier of +2 against the next attack aimed at you. Okay? Pierce. Bows and spears, 1. Swords, 2. You have hit a less protected part of the adversary's body. Spend 1 success icon to modify a feat die numerical result of your attack by +2, thus possibly triggering a piercing blow. Gandalf, runes, and Eye of Sauron results are unaffected. Okay, piercing blows. In addition to causing the loss of endurance points, any successful attack may inflict a piercing blow. An attack roll produces a piercing blow on a 10, okay, or a Gandalf rune. Okay, 10 or Gandalf rune, that's what we're looking for, and then we get piercing blow. Characters hit by a piercing blow must immediately roll 1 feat die plus a number of success dice equal to the protection value of the armor worn. Okay, so here we have the coat of silver mail that Balin is wearing here, and its protection is 4d +2. Oh, it also has a load of 10 and his shield has a load of 4, so he's got 14 load, so he's probably still good with the amount that he's carrying. But he's got a protection value of 4d plus 2. Characters hit by a piercing blow must immediately roll 1 feat die plus a number of success die equal to the protection value of the armor worn. So, in that case, Balin would be rolling that if hit by a piercing blow. The target number for the roll is equal to the injury rating of the weapon used by the attacker. If the roll fails, the target of the attack has received a life-threatening blow, a wound. Oh, so Balin's axe here has an injury rating of 18. I don't know what type of... Let's look. Let's look for another weapon. What kind of thing would an orc be using? Well, let's just say an orc... Well, that would be the same thing. A short spear. Let's say that the orc is we got a goblin here attacking with a short spear. And its injury rating is 14. And so, well, I rolled Gandalf rune, so I suppose that is automatic success. If I didn't roll that, 10, I rolled plenty. So I exceeded the injury result of the short spear there, so I guess I would not have received a mortal wound, or a life-threatening wound. Wounds. Most adversaries are killed outright when wounded, unless specified differently in their description. Player heroes, on the other hand, can resist being wounded once without serious consequences, but risk more if injured a second time. When player heroes are wounded for the first time, they check the wounded box on their character sheet. As seen under Endurance on page 18, player heroes whose wounded box is checked recover endurance slowly. Player heroes who are wounded a second time, that is, they receive a wound when their wounded box was already checked, see their endurance drop to 0, they fall unconscious. This second wound is not recorded on the character sheet. Player heroes recover from their injuries between adventurers, or in a week. They are allowed to reduce the severity of their wound with a healing roll. A successful healing roll reduces the time required to recover by 1 day, plus 1 day for each success icon scored to a minimum of 1 day. Each hero may be administered a successful healing roll only once. A failed roll cannot be repeated until at least a day has passed, as the failure of the treatment isn't immediately apparent. Okay, so serious injuries and death. The rules about injuries as detailed in this starter set are meant to evoke a mood that is more appropriate to stories as those presented in the adventures. Adventuring in the Shire is meant to be exciting, maybe thrilling, but never life-threatening. Hobbit adventurers and their like are meant to return home with an exciting tale to tell their many relations, not to be mourned after their demise. And then we have a bit here on other actions other than attacks and talking with the enemy. Well, I like it. It seems simple, but it does seem evocative. I want to play it. I want to give it a try. So it seemed like to me, it never explicitly said it, but it seemed like then there are 2 ways to get wounded. If you go to 0 endurance, you're wounded, so you're kind of tracking that. But then there's also risk in combat, it seemed like, because you can also get wounded on any particular strike, because if the enemy strikes you with, a piercing blow, then you have to roll against your armor, and if you don't succeed, then you immediately get wounded. So I like that too. I like the danger there. You know that I'm not a big fan of just, here, have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 hit points, and let's chip away at them with dice rolls for multiple rounds of combat. I don't like that. I don't think it makes combat as meaningful as it needs to be. I like for it to be short, intense, and meaningful and evocative. At least that's my preference. And so this seems to be that way. You do have hit points, a version of hit points, the endurance here, but then you also have the ability to, all of a sudden, almost like a critical hit, you're in a bad situation, and can be very quickly. So that's risk. That's risk in combat. So I like it. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments section. Did I miss something? Do we need some additional clarification on something? This was just the light introductory rules inside the starter box. So there's probably a lot more to get into in the main rule set. But I'm really looking forward to getting into this. I would love to do a little test of the combat and the system in here. I think it'd be fun. So if you've enjoyed this video, please check out the playlists on my YouTube channel. I've got a lot more on fantasy, on role-playing games, on action figures, and I organize all of my videos by playlists, so you can go over there, find the topic that you're interested in, click on it, and dive into the videos and enjoy. I look forward to seeing you in many more videos to come.